Bye. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. We look forward to seeing you Wednesday night.
You.
Haven't put in
Rabbi,
your... Yeah,
can I ask a question?
sure.
You sure?
Yeah.
Or do you have to run?
No, I'm still here.
Okay. So I'm kind of a Karaite at basis. You know that, right?
Say again?
I'm a Karaite. You know that.
How are you a Karaite?
Because I have a real problem with the oral Torah. Like, I just have a problem with it.
It doesn't make you a Karaite. That makes you a normal person.
Rabbi Kaczynski always used to say, don't be a Karaite, every time I would ask a question.
It's very hard to be a Karaite, by the way, because if you were a Karaite, then you wouldn't have any lights on in your house on Shabbos. You wouldn't have any warm food. You wouldn't light Shabbos candles. There's a whole bunch of things you would do. You would believe in
Right. What do you think
an eye for an eye. So you know Karaite.
Okay, thank you. So I'm thinking, this is what I was thinking. I had a thought during class. I've never, because I'm constantly wrestling with this idea that
Yes.
a bunch of guys, a bunch of mortals got together and said, you know what, when we have a piece of fish on a plate, you really shouldn't have a piece of meat on the same plate, and like all this minutia, and suddenly that's halacha. Like that is the part of the mitzvot that we have to do, and we don't distinguish between stuff that's in the Torah and all of this little minutia. And I started thinking to myself, oh, you know what? Anyway, it reminds me of a joke that they always tell about it. But anyway, I started thinking to myself, you know what? Maybe we did make that stuff up, but, and maybe we weren't supposed to do all these cockamamie little things that aren't in the Torah, but God is getting a kick out of it because he sees how much we're doing it out of love for him. Am I making any sense?
Oh, I am so happy you brought this up.
Well, I'm always thinking about this. This was one of the reasons I wanted to come into your office and discuss this, because I'm
Really? Oh, great. This is even better. This way we have it recorded. I love it.
Oh, no. Good. I'm always thinking about this, and it occurred to me, well, maybe he's getting a real kick out of this, and when we go and our neshama gets relief from our body, God is going to say, you know what? It was just really cute. It was absolutely really cute, and it comes from a really good place, and I'm really happy, and I feel much closer to you. And thank you.
Okay,
not that it was accurate.
So I like people to make their purchases based on knowledge.
Informed
They should be a knowledgeable consumer. You need to know.
Okay.
So I feel that I'm not sure why or how you got the impression about the oral Torah as you did. So I'm a big defender of the oral Torah.
Okay, good.
Simply because I just, if people have a problem with the oral Torah, that's fine, but just make sure you know that you have all the facts.
Okay.
So that's important to me to
right. I don't want to prejudice with no actual.
Right.
Yeah.
So for some reason, there's this idea that the rabbis are just either inventing things or minutia and things like that. That's my question to you is, on what basis? What is your either evidence or what is the basis for your thinking that that's the motivation of the rabbis?
No, I don't know that it's the motivation. Maybe they think that they're actually hearing this from God, but I don't think so.
Why? No, on what basis are you saying that?
Because at some point I cut off. I go, okay, like Moshe was hearing from God, and maybe King David was hearing from God, and we start going down, but like some rabbi that made up this like meat and fish and and different, silverware sets and whether or not you can use the same rack in your dishwasher, that stuff, like, they're not hearing from God. I don't believe that. I think that they made up something in good faith, but I don't think that it's real.
Okay, again, I'm going to push back because what
Please.
you're saying is you're doing, for whatever reason, and I would love to understand why, you've come up with that conclusion based on what? What is the basis for it? So this is my I'll put it to you very simply. So you can't imagine that this is something God would want.
Right.
So you're basically creating God in your image because you feel that you know God very, very well.
You're right.
Those rabbis, they didn't know God really well. No, you know God much better than the rabbi. So to me, I just don't understand where that's coming from. It's like, what, based on what? That's what I'm just asking. I'm
just saying that to follow those laws, all that minutia, is a very, very, very big leap of faith. For me,
Why?
A bigger leap than believing every word in the Torah. Because it's not in the Torah; it's by some guy.
So in other words, if let me just clarify, if
what happened to you? You disappeared.
I'm here. Here. If everything in the Torah, or the written Torah, or the oral Torah, agreed with your worldview, then you would say the rabbis were geniuses. Right? They're geniuses.
I'm not saying that there's anything inherently wrong with any of these rules. I just find it a bridge too far to think that God was speaking to every level of these rabbis who came up with this stuff.
I wonder, can I pipe in?
Sure.
Yeah, I wonder whether everything can be deduced from what's found in the Torah. Like what we saw it today where it says that everything is in the 10 Commandments. I heard a really interesting discourse, I guess it was a Hasidic discourse this week, on arrogance. And what the rabbi was saying was that that arrogance is the ultimate of idol worship. That God hates that most of all is when you're arrogant, when you're putting yourself above him. No, I'm not trying to say anything, Jerry. I'm just saying generally it's making me think about that maybe it's all right in there. It's all deduced, and the rabbis just extract from the 10 Commandments and from the Torah what is hegioni, what is logical according to what's written there. So I don't know what you think of that, Rabbi, but.
So again, I go on this to go on the offensive rather than the defensive here, because there's a tendency. Again, I just want to we have to set the table. I'll then go to the other things because it's. So that's really the first thing. In other words, we have a bias. We're coming to this one with a bias. I'm just trying to show you your bias, and the bias is that since these things don't agree with you, therefore, you don't think they're coming from God. But if you somehow felt that they agreed with you, no matter how ridiculous they would be,
no, I'm honestly making the distinction between stuff that appears in the Torah and stuff that doesn't. It's not a matter of, I think lighting candles is lovely.
Right.
It's not that I don't agree with it. I think it's great. But it's not, I just don't get how we can think that this comes me Sinai. I just don't get that.
Right.
It's not that I don't think it's nice. It's not that I'm trying not to put a judgment on it. It's the source.
Right. So again, the assumption is that that again, you're making an assumption. The assumption is that these rabbis didn't get the memo. They didn't transport it properly. They just sat down one day and they just made it up. Right?
Rabbi, can I?
Sure.
Well, I appreciate all this discussion because I think it's a perfect segue to the Shavuot, because at the Shavuot, as we all know, God gave us the Torah, period. But when Moses came back, he brought just the tablets with the 10 Commandments. So 10 Commandments is not the Torah. It means that he got the essence of the Torah. How? He got the oral Torah. And then the first, well, according to what I searched today by my wife's request, the first Torah, which was actually written, was during the Second Temple, during the Babylon exile. Right?
But you're saying that everything is oral Torah anyway, besides the 10
before that,
Commandments.
it was the essence of the Torah, which is the oral Torah. But
which is the 10 Commandments.
Well, which is the 10 Commandments. I absolutely agree with you. So the rest, what we need to do, we need to understand how to interpret it. And that's what we're doing in this class and tomorrow class and every day and every minute. We're trying to understand how to apply it to our life.
Let me try to add something to this conversation a little bit.
What happened to your face, Rabbi?
Oh, what? Not sure why you can't see me. Hello?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know why.
Oh, there we go.
Okay.
So when God came down from, what did God exactly give to Moses on Mount Sinai?
Right. That's a big question.
So if you understand that he only gave him the written Torah, then you have all of the problems that you have. But if he gave us the written Torah and the oral Torah,
right,
then there goes the whole problem. Moses gave the oral Torah with everything to us. And this is all included in that Torah.
That's the leap of faith.
No. It's so actually the opposite, because the Torah, the written Torah, has 0 instructions in it, and the oral Torah has all the instructions in it. So it's obvious that they come together. You can't have one without the other. So it's from a leap of faith perspective, there's no leap of faith at all. There actually is no way to understand the written Torah without the oral Torah. It just doesn't make any sense.
I don't want to make this personal, but I think you know what I did for a living for decades, which was write regulations for the government. So if you look at a statute that's passed by the legislature, there's no way that you can give that statute to the people and have them follow it. You have to have the regulations in order to, which give you all the details on how to follow it. So the statute really, you can't really live by a law without having the regulations to sort of ensure compliance. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. So that's the analogy. But in my mind, the statute, let's say, in my analogy, is like it's straight from the legislature. The regulations are man-made. They're lower. So they're easier to change. They're easier to challenge. They're more mortal, kind of. But the legislators, like they in Congress, they're the ones that came up. Am I making any sense? So there's a hierarchy.
Yes, of course.
There's a hierarchy.
I get the context very well.
Yeah. So maybe my mind is warped because I think in that, with using that analogy. Is that what you think?
No, not at all. Not at all. It's just that you don't have enough information about the transmission of the Torah. In other words, so if the Torah works like that, first of all, let's clarify something. In the Torah, if let's say God says in the Torah that the legislators have just as much authority, if God says
the regulators, maybe
the regulators, sorry, but the regulators have the same authority as the legislators.
Yeah, that would be a big deal.
Right. So that's why it says in the Torah, I'm sorry, in the Rambam codifies and says that when you make a blessing over a rabbinic mitzvah, you still say Asher Kidishanu b'mitzvotav etzivanu, who has commanded us. Hold on one second. I'm back. So so how could we say that Hashem has given us the Torah, given us this mitzvah when it was a rabbinic mitzvah? And the Rambam codifies and says, because in the Torah it says, and you have to, in other words, you have to listen to everything that they will come up with. So in the Torah it says,
where does it say that?
It says that in Deuteronomy. Whatever they will rule is my word.
Who's they?
The rabbis, the Shefet Ashiyah B'Amein, whoever the judge is going to be in that time and in that generation, Elov Tishmon, you have to listen to him. So from that perspective, God has already clarified to us and said that whatever the rabbis are going to say is going to be my word. That's number one. So, but the rabbis only came up with 7 mitzvahs. There's only 7 mitzvahs d'Rabbanan. There's only 7 rabbinic mitzvahs. The rabbis didn't just go along and make lots of mitzvahs. And even the things that the rabbis did add, for example, like muktzah or things like that, which something that they added to the whole Shabbos experience. So even those, there's not, again, that's the minority of the things that the rabbis did. What the rabbis mostly do, and that's why there's very, very little argument. People always point to me and say, well, there's so much argument in the Talmud. But what they don't realize is how much the rabbis agree upon that doesn't say in the Torah. That's what's missing. What's missing is that everyone agrees on so much, which it doesn't say in the Torah. So the oral Torah is actually quite extensive in its transmission. So for example, tefillin have to be black. Tefillin have to be square.
Where does it say all this?
These are things that all in the Talmud and all in the oral Torah, and none of this is disputed by any rabbi. So 99% of all the things that it says in the Torah are agreed upon by all the rabbis, which is called, that's what you call Judaism today. So Judaism is a practice that has been passed down from generation to generation. That is done.
And it's basically a rabbinic religion. That's what people mean when they say that it's a rabbinic religion. Okay, so where does it say in the Torah that at some year you cut it off?
No. So those who would like to discredit Judaism, call it rabbinic.
I didn't realize that was a big insult. But I mean,
big insult. That's what the Christians try to do. That's what every group that's tried to take away the authority of the Torah because they want to interpret it their own way has basically tried to discredit the rabbis. But all the rabbis are doing is they're just passing on the tradition of the oral Torah.
Okay, what year? Where does it say in the Bible that it cuts off at this year, and there are no more rabbis to interpret?
It doesn't say anywhere that the rabbis are interpreting anything. The rabbis don't have the right to interpret things. They have the right to transmit, and they have the right to introduce new things. So if the rabbis come up with a mitzvah, and again, the rabbis are very, 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 very cautious in never adding a mitzvah. And by the way, they added only 7 mitzvahs in all the time that they did. So it's a very small amount of mitzvahs that they added. And the mitzvahs that they added are the ones that you're most familiar with, like lighting the Hanukkah menorah, reading the Megillah, right? Washing your hands before bread, lighting Shabbos candles. These are all rabbinic rabbinic mitzvahs. They're the backbone of Judaism. They're not just some off thing that people do. This is very, very much a part of Judaism. But again, these are all very, very similar to things that are in the Torah. In other words, washing your hands before bread is something that was done in the temple. So it's not like the rabbi said, "Oh, we saw this in some other practice, and let's co-opt it and bring it over to Judaism." No, it was this was a practice that all the Kohanim did in the temple before they would eat bread. They had to wash their hands, and the rabbi said, "Well, we want to teach everybody to remember this washing of the hands. So let's have everybody wash their hands." And the same thing with the on Passover when we had a great miracle happen, we made a big Seder, and we do something to recognize the miracle. So it was a great miracle of Purim.
Okay, what coming?
And when we have the the miracle of Hanukkah, we should do something to publicize the miracle of Hanukkah. So they're not like co-opting things from other religions and introducing new ideas to Judaism.
Right, I never said anything like that. I was just wondering.
Yeah, good. So now let's go back to the oral Torah. So what is the oral Torah? So the oral Torah is a transmission of what God is saying that I want. So how specific, how particular, how detail-oriented was God the first day they met God? So the first Jews who met God at Mount Sinai, and they got the Torah, and Moses came down from the Torah and he said, "You shall write these as a sign upon your hand, and write them as a reminder between your eyes. Write them on the doorposts of your house and upon your gates." So they said to Moses, they said, "Okay, so we can basically do whatever we want, right?" He doesn't really care. No, Moses said, it has to be a box. It has to be made out of leather. It has to be square. It has to be black. It has to be forced. It has to have this.
Okay, but that's Moses.
No, Moses said, "This is what God told me. Everything I wrote, if you believe what I wrote, why are you believing only what I wrote and not what I tell you that God said not to write down?" So
you're saying the source of all of the oral Torah is Moses?
Exactly. That's the whole point. Moshe kibel Torah misinai. He received two Torahs. He received a written Torah and an oral Torah. That's exactly what he received. One he wrote down, and one he was, by law, they were not allowed to write it down. It was a rabbi, Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, Rabbi Yehuda the Prince, just 1,800 years ago, broke tradition and actually wrote it down because you weren't allowed to write it down. Jews were not allowed to.
So they knew everything that Moses said about all these details. For example, the tefillin. And they didn't write it down. It just went from generation to generation. The knowledge.
Yes, they took notes. They took notes for themselves, but they weren't allowed to publish it. There were no published. You couldn't go to a library and say, "Can I please have the oral Torah?" They say, "No, it's not available in print. You have to go and study and memorize it." And so the rabbis had to memorize it. There was a memorization, and they had to test it. In order to become a rabbi, you had to literally have the entire oral Torah memorized. And that's why it's different than regulators and legislators and so on, because that they don't have that kind of rigor to be able to do that.
There's no direct line to the legislature.
Correct, exactly. Here
it's us thinking up stuff.
Right. So smicha means you had to go in front of another rabbi who had who was also ordained, and you could then get that ordained. Then you could get ordained if you could prove that you remembered every single thing to someone who knew it by heart himself. Now, you could have notes. Everybody could take notes. But ultimately, we were going to test you and see if you knew your notes by going to the highest rabbi, and he would say, he memorized the whole thing. He knew it all by heart, and he would then test you. And if you could repeat it all back, then you got the smicha. And this
was happening from the time of Sinai.
Yes, from the time of Moses. We know the names of every single rabbi that got smicha going all the way back to Moses. So
Aaron, I thought it went back to Aaron, didn't it?
Moses.
Okay. I thought Aaron was the first one. Aaron gave smicha.
But ultimately, he gave it on to Yeshua. Joshua was the next in line, not Aaron, because Aaron passed away before him. So Joshua was the next in the line. So that's again, the oral Torah is coming from is the foundation of our Judaism, not the written Torah. So that's by the way, this is why.
But this is why people say it's a rabbinic religion. I don't know that it's a big insult, but whatever.
No, it's not. It's not. The rabbis didn't make it up. The rabbis just transmitted it, which is why if you look through the Talmud, the most common word you find in the Talmud for any time there's a question is teku. We don't know. The rabbis were not making up anything in the Talmud. You're not allowed to make up anything, which is why the rabbis disagreed, because they were just passing down the tradition they were given from their teacher. And that's because Moses taught them different explanations or different understandings of the mitzvah. So when Moses gave them the oral tradition, he said, listen, it's much more nuanced. This is not black and white. This is very, very nuanced. And God gave me a whole bunch of different ways, different opinions. And that's up to the rabbis to decide which of the different God opinions we're going to follow in the moment. So I, as Moses, as being the head of this generation, I am going to tell you what we're going to do now for this time. But,
okay, but when does that end? That like
when Moses died and Joshua took over, he now had the authority to now choose between the opinions that Moses had given him that were all coming from God.
Right, and then how many generations did this go before it was cut off?
It didn't get cut off. It's still going on today. In other words, the Chabad doesn't agree with the other group, and the other group doesn't agree with the other group. Every group does what they understand, what their tradition is. We all follow the tradition of our paths. So, and then what eventually happened was they came to a consensus about certain things. When they came to a consensus about that, the next generation didn't go back and try to undo the consensus. So that we do have. So once there was a consensus, so basically, if you want to go back to it, there was a time where this all did stop. And that was in the time of the first beginning of the Mishnah, where there were two rabbis, both named Yossi, and the two of them had an argument. And the reason they had an argument was because it was the first time in history that there wasn't one Jewish leader, there were two Jewish leaders. And that was because they didn't feel that they each one had the authority to be able to hold on to do it by himself. So he said, you know what, I don't feel right to take on this authority and this responsibility by myself. I'd like someone to join me. And so now you had two tremendous rabbis, and they agreed on everything except for one thing. And so what do you do when the two rabbis themselves, there's no higher person to go to. See, when Moses was around, Moses was the authority for everybody. When Joshua was around, Joshua was the authority of everybody. So each generation, but when you got to the first generation where they decided to have two leaders, if we can't decide, we have no top authority to go to decide. And that's where the first machloket began. And from then on, it divided between not just two, then into 3 and 4 and 5 and 6 and 7 and 8 and 10. And so then they were going by majority. They had all different ways of trying to come to a consensus and so on. And so that's all to this day, correct. So it's a very dynamic, which is why the written Torah was supposed to be written down, because it's finite. The oral Torah was not allowed to be written down because it's infinite. It really does not have an end. There is no end to it because of the way it's designed, the way God designed it, not because we are going to interpret it to pieces all over the place. No, it's because that is the depth of it. It's just this unlimited space. So if you write it like a Torah, then you limit it. But if you look at the Talmud, the rabbis wrote it in such a way that it leaves it infinite. Even though it's written down, you read it and you don't know what the conclusion is. You're not really sure, because that's what they wanted. They wanted to preserve each of the opinions. They didn't want to say, well, that opinion is not worth anything, because the opinion is important. It's God's opinion. So for example, we are told that Hillel and Shammai were two great rabbis who argued. And Hillel was always more lenient, and Shammai was usually more machmir, were more strict. So it says that the rabbis came to the conclusion that Rabbi Hillel the law is like him. But the understanding is that when Mashiach comes, the law is going to be like Shammai, because Shammai had a deeper understanding, and he was pushing people to a higher level. That's what it means, strict. He wasn't tough. He just had a higher expectation of people. Hillel was more kind and generous, and therefore he said, they can't handle it. We'll go the more lenient path. So,
Rabbi, there's a I guess you'd call it an administrative rule in American law, which is that you cannot regulate statutory language if the statutory language is unambiguous. That's a very big word, okay, in administrative law, unambiguous. So I'm assuming that, and it's just an analogy and I don't know what I'm talking about, but I'm assuming that there are things in the written Torah that are just considered unambiguous. And even though rabbis are interpreting stuff to this day, that there's certain stuff that they won't touch.
So let me clarify. The oral Torah, the written Torah, there's no such thing as unambiguous, because the written Torah, no such thing. No. Because in the Torah it says an eye for an eye, and the rabbis say, no, it doesn't mean that. In the Torah it says clearly something, and the rabbis say, no, that's not what it means. So the oral Torah, absolutely, if there's an oral tradition. Again, the rabbis can never, ever, ever go against something in the Torah. You can't go against the Torah. But they have to have a tradition for it. So the tradition was that an eye for an eye was never meant to be taken literally. It's not like the rabbis come up and they woke up one day and go, boy, that's barbaric to be taking out somebody's eye. Let's change that. No, it never meant. When Moses came down from the mountain, he said, an eye for an eye, it doesn't mean an eye for an eye. It means the value of an eye for an eye. That's called the oral Torah. Write that down, but don't publish it. Or memorize it, don't publish it. So that was the idea of the oral Torah. The oral Torah is exactly that. It was the tradition of what in the world the Torah actually means. But so at no time could a rabbi come along later on and say, well, I read the Torah and I seem to see something different. No, that's not what happened. A rabbi could come along and say, I heard from my teacher that he had a tradition going all the way back to Moses that this verse has this meaning. Oh, well, I'm glad you heard that. I didn't hear that. I heard from my teacher. So
and then what?
Good. So now we have two opinions, and they're both valid opinions because God has different opinions. So Elu v'Elu divrei Elokim chayim. Both of these are the words of the living God. So
there's nothing. There's nothing in the Torah that's unambiguous.
Correct.
I'll tell you what I'm thinking about right now, even though this hasn't been in my mind throughout this conversation. But I was watching all these YouTubes about, Orthodox, quote unquote. I know your uncle hates that word. Orthodox Judaism and what they're going to do about homosexuality. Okay. So there are all of these rabbis and people begging, you gotta loosen up on this, man. You gotta, look at this. And they're going, no, it says right here in Leviticus, whatever. And that's it. Boom. Like they won't. I mean, they try to be nice about it. A lot of them try to be really nice about it, especially the Chabad rabbis on the panel. But they just say it's written here. There's nothing we can do.
Right.
So there's something that's not considered. You just said everything's ambiguous.
No. The oral Torah told us already what's ambiguous and what's not ambiguous.
Oh.
That the oral Torah has already told us.
I thought you just said everything is ambiguous.
Meaning, without the oral Torah, the written Torah, we don't know what it means. With the oral Torah, now we know exactly what it means, which is exactly what the Christians do. The Christians come along and they say, well, based on your Bible, Jesus is the Messiah. He's the one. But what they're doing is they're reading the Torah and they're dismissing the oral meaning of the verse. That's the whole problem. They're dismissing the oral. They're saying we don't recognize the oral Torah. And therefore, the Torah is the authority, and it's unambiguous, and it clearly states that Christianity is the. That's what they did throughout history. They would bring Jews in, bring them their Torah, show them here. It says this and this and this, and therefore you must convert and become Christian. And the Jews were saying, but the oral Torah doesn't say that. And they're saying, the oral Torah was made up by the rabbis. And they said, no, you don't understand. The rabbis didn't make up anything. The rabbis were simply telling us the tradition of what Moses said is what the Torah means.
So
But
I unwittingly am playing the Christian in this discussion.
no, it's not just the Christian. I gave you other branches of Judaism throughout the ages that had done the same thing. That's why the Karaites and the Sadducees and so on and so forth throughout history. We've had many Jewish factions within that also did the same thing, and they tried to undermine, again, the Sadducees. The Sadducees were really not such religious Jews. The Karaites were much more religious, and therefore, they didn't practice any of these things. They didn't have fire on Shabbos, and they did believe you should poke out people's eyes if they poked out somebody else's eye. They were real believers in the
right.
Torah.
No, they still
Rabbi?
are. They exist.
Yes.
Hi, it's Hillary.
Hi, Hillary.
How are you? I came in late, and also this is very deep for me because I'm learning everything.
Good.
But this, what is it, Jerry?
Yes.
Okay. What comes to my mind is that people would tell me to just, about Judaism, they would say, well, that's all based on legend. So you kind of answered a question for me because I seriously did not know about this, the oral Torah versus the written. Now, I know that sounds ridiculous being a Jew, but
No, it doesn't sound
I'm
ridiculous.
still learning. And when people,
Unfortunately, we have unfortunately gotten our education about what Judaism is from non-Jewish sources.
right, or parents that didn't practice Judaism but were brought up by Orthodox, came here and they were born here, but they didn't want to assimilate. I mean, they wanted to assimilate. That my parents. So it wasn't. None of this was talked about, and I didn't know anything. But is that why some people say it's based on legend? Because the oral Torah, like you said, and that's why people discuss all these different things, and you're right, and you're right, and you're wrong, and I'm right. I'm trying to understand because that's what I hear, that it's based on legend and it doesn't, they didn't know what they were writing, or they just kept changing the writing, what it said. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yes. So people who don't really know about the oral Torah make up all sorts of things about it. It's called fake news. So basically, it's like, I thought that the History Channel knew all about history until the History Channel did a piece on something that I actually knew about. As soon as they did a history piece on Jews, and I go, what?
What?
They don't know anything about Jews. They're giving a very, very slanted and very, very agendized view of the Jews. So maybe they were doing the same when they spoke about other groups and other times of history. So again, where is this information coming from? The information is coming from fake news. So people who don't really know what the Talmud says, they take it out of context. They've never studied it. They've never studied it critically. They've never had proper education. They can quote you here and there a couple of things, but they don't really have the full context and so on. And they can't really put it all together. And with that, they're basically lying about what the oral Torah really is, what Judaism really is.
So this kind of helps me because it opens up discussion when my relatives or friends or niece or whatever will say something to me. Well, it's all based on legend, and it's not. This isn't true. That isn't true. So I have something to talk about because I'm learning about the oral Torah. Okay, thank you. Thank you, everybody, for that.
Listen, as a kid growing up, I remember all the time, people would say things like, oh, why we keep kosher? We keep kosher because, back then they didn't have refrigeration.
Exactly. That's what they say. Yeah.
Right. So it's like based on what? Where did they come up with these things? This is absolute. Someone came up with a story, made it up, fake news, and then they're trying to sell it to, that they're peddling it. It's absolute nonsense. It's garbage. It's a mere hypothesis that someone came up and stuck it onto something, and it's lazy. It's just, and people are willing to buy it and believe it because someone with a quote unquote PhD or whatever it is behind their name made it up, and therefore all of a sudden it becomes true. But where's the due diligence? Where's the proper talk? And whenever they do a story on Hasidim, but they never interview a Hasid to ask the Hasid about what are the significance.
Yeah, well, I have an answer to that, by the way, today.
Yeah.
Your uncle, as beloved to me as he is, did an hour interview today on the series Unorthodox and started the interview by saying, I haven't seen it and I didn't read the book. Please. And then he gave an hour's worth of opinions on it.
Yeah, I can give you 10 hours on it without even watching it.
Why? Why would you do that?
Because Hollywood has a penchant for portraying Orthodox Jews a certain way. It just fits their agenda beautifully.
Right.
So,
you don't, yeah, if you didn't see it and you didn't read the book, then you really don't know what they said. That's it.
Okay, and I can
You can guess.
I can guess, and it's a very educated guess based on let me just put it this way. I've heard enough interviews about, listen, there's many books I haven't read, but I listen to the authors, I listen to the people who talk about it, and you get a sense of what the book is about. I feel the same thing. I've listened to enough interviews about people, pro and con, and read articles and so on and so forth, to get a sense of what it is. Now, whether or not they got it exactly the way someone described it or didn't describe it, I wouldn't be surprised. I would not be surprised at how they portrayed it. Now, I think my uncle did a very, very good job in actually defending them. He actually defended them, which was brilliant how he did it. So in that interview, he actually did a fantastic job of really defending them by saying his point was that that the idea of Orthodox means that you take the religion more serious than you take people. And what he was saying is there are people like that, and it's good criticism.
Yeah.
But it
no,
doesn't.
I like the way he doesn't like the word Orthodox.
He framed it
very,
very nice. It was very good. But
like
getting back to the subject of the oral Torah, because this is the most important. Again, people with limited amounts of information about it, with preconceived notions and preconceived biases, come to the oral Torah or to the Torah with these preconceived notions. And so they're not coming with an open mind, with a clear mind, or just an objective mind. They've already come with their mind made up based on either past experiences or past knowledge or things like that. They're not coming to it genuinely, openly, and therefore looking at it from that perspective. So once you do that, you can still argue, you can still find faults and flaws and so on. I'm not saying that there aren't places for question and so on. But these questions are, they're just, again, they're just based on limited information that then is put into a context that really is out of context of Judaism. So the real context is that, again, the Torah never had a time when it didn't have an oral Torah. And if you could prove to me that there was a time when Jews had the Torah without the oral Torah, that would be the beginning of our conversation. Because until you have proof of the opposite, why don't you go with your own story? Okay, so your great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandfather, going all the way back, believed that the oral Torah and the written Torah were given at the same time. Then, about 300 or 400, 2,000 years ago, someone came up and said, no, the oral Torah didn't come from, it wasn't given at the same time. It was made up by the rabbis at a later time. Okay, fine, very good. Do you have any proof of that? Do you have any, if you can't just come along after years and years and years of people believing something and just say, no, we don't believe that anymore, because why not? What's your basis for this? We have plenty of proof for this. We have no proof for this, but you just made it up, and therefore now we have a very simple. So the Sadducees, the Sadducees were the first ones to do it. The Sadducees were not interested in serving God. They had no interest in being religious. They weren't like the Karaites who came even later. So the Karaites came at the end of the Second Temple. After the Second Temple period is when the Karaites come along. But the Sadducees were we're kind of at the end of the Second Temple period. They were in the middle of the Second Temple period till the end of the Second Temple period. They had no interest in being religious. They were just being Sadducees just to undermine the authority of the rabbis. When the Karaites came along, then they tried to really do it seriously and genuinely, and they really struggle with it. And there are still 25,000 Karaites today. There are Karaites in the world today. Actually, just they exist in the world. They're around.
Yeah, there's a group in San Francisco, I think.
Yeah, they're all over.
And there's a Karaite synagogue in Jerusalem. I've been there. I saw it.
Yeah, there's Karaites all over the place, but they're not. Again, there's plenty of other breakaway forms of Judaism throughout the generations. This is not nothing new to Judaism to have. I won't pray in that synagogue. That's pretty common in the Jewish experience. Okay, that's fine. We can agree to disagree and so on. But again, to me, the onus goes back to the people, the Karaites. Okay, Karaites, can you tell me, would you have any evidence? What's your evidence that the rabbis were the ones who introduced this? I have plenty of evidence to the contrary. What's your evidence that the rabbis made up anything?
Okay, look, I think I was much more influenced by conservative Judaism than I was by the Christians.
Well, conservative Judaism basically says this has a similar position.
I know, but at least give me some credit for that. I'm steeped in the conservative perspective on this.
Right, but I think this is more this is more, it's more contrasting when you put it in that context.
What do you mean?
What
happened to your
conservative,
face?
you say conservative. When I say Christian, it's more it's
kind of insulting. It's not that I'm not capable of receiving things through osmosis from the culture. Obviously I am. But I'm pretty steeped in the conservative and, viewpoint on this stuff. And it's very much a position that there's a lot of stuff that's just rabbinic. Therefore, we can switch it around. We can switch it up.
The challenge that I have with the conservative is that they're all over the place.
Right.
So you say conservative, you have to be. You say conservative, you have to be more clear as to which part of the conservative movement you're referring to.
Right.
You have the
like Rabbi Mordecai Kaplan was at the conservative yeshiva, and they threw him out. They didn't throw him out. They started a new branch, but they didn't like him there because he had a whole different viewpoint on all this stuff.
Right. So you have conservative rabbis who are more like Reform, more like Reconstructionists, and more like Orthodox. From all over the place.
Right. All right. I don't know what happened to you, but Zoom probably is kicking. Here you are. All right. We're all getting tired, but this has been very, very illuminating, Rabbi. Thank you.
Very, very important. It's extremely important because I think that the biggest obstacle to most people is the obstacle of the oral Torah.
Really?
Yes.
So it's not just me. It wasn't just me and my personal problem.
99% of the people that I meet, this is the issue.
Seriously?
Yes, this is the issue.
I wish I brought it up earlier.
This is the issue that gets between them and serving Hashem, is that they've been told, or they've heard, or they've been taught, or however they got it through osmosis or whoever it is, that that this is rabbinic Judaism.
Right.
And therefore, I'm not into rabbinic Judaism. I want to be with God. And by the way, Martin Luther, who was a big anti-Semite who would try to destroy the Jewish people, when he realized what he came up with is, why did he become? He was really loved the Jews, and he thought he was saving the Jews. And then when the Jews rejected him, he became the biggest anti-Semite. So what happened? So Martin Luther was freeing the Christians from the Catholic Church.
Right.
Now the Catholic Church, they have this idea that the church has the power to override the Bible, because in other words, they're divine,
Right.
and they're the ones who have it. So therefore,
Well,
the
Pope,
Bible,
the Pope has divinity. I can't remember what the term is, but yeah.
right? And so therefore, the written Torah is really not is a suggestion, but it's not the word of God, and it's the Pope or the whatever the group that comes up with these things. They're the ones who decide these things. So he broke away from the Catholic Church and said, no, we're breaking from the Pope. We're going to the Word. If it says it's the Bible, it's the Word of God. We're tying it. Now, for the Jews, this was a very, very important thing, because in the Catholics, what they said is that we don't have to go by the Word anymore, and therefore Israel doesn't mean the Jews anymore. It means Catholics.
Mm.
But now that Martin Luther said, no, we have to go by the Word, the Jews have now become the Jews again.
So that was a good thing.
So he thought the Jews are going to love me. They're going to come running. They're going to come running to Christianity, because now they could be Jews again. And so he comes to the Jews and he says to the Jews, okay, I've freed you from it. I've made the Torah, the written Torah, I've made it holy again. I've given it back to you. And the Jews said, we have an oral Torah that goes along with the written Torah. And they're both the same Torah. And he wrote the worst anti-Semitic screed that's probably ever been written. And he posted it on nailed it to the shul. It's a really, terrible. But that was his attempt. His attempt was, let's free the Torah from the rabbis,
from the
or
Pope,
the church, or the Pope, or whatever it is, whoever's holding the Torah hostage. Let's bring it back. Let's sanctify the Torah. Let's bring it back to God. And the Jews have been saying that, and so different groups have done this as well. Not just
Luther,
not just others, but even groups within Judaism have done the same thing. That is, the rabbis, it's a bunch of patriarchal men, white men sitting around, and they weren't white anyways. They were Israelis and Babylonians, so they were yellow or brown or something. I don't know. They weren't.
Right.
Okay, but
I always say that.
They were definitely patriarchal, and they were, these are all the things against the rabbis who are just passing on the tradition. That's all. It's Moshe Kibel Torah Misinai Umisara Yoshua. He passed it on to Yeshua. Now I ask you, what did he? That's the Mishnah, by the way, right? The Mishnah says that Moshe received the Torah. What Torah are we talking about? The written one? Everybody has a copy of that. We're talking about the oral Torah that he passed down. So again, this is fundamental to Judaism, and it's fundamental to every part of Judaism. And once you take that, once you decouple the written Torah from the oral Torah, you've essentially ungrounded the Torah. You've ungrounded it from its source, and now it's open to everybody's interpretation. That's the whole point. So now and that's what I'm saying. So yeah, some people will say, well, we got it right. No, we got it right. No, the rabbis got it wrong. Well, we for sure got it right. So the Christians say we got it right. The others say they got it right. This one says they got it right. But as soon as you decouple the oral Torah from the written Torah, the written Torah becomes, in a sense, a meaningless book that is used by yourself to project yourself onto God and to decide for God what he should want based on what you want at the moment. And so if there's a time...
Are you trying to directly insult me?
No.
No.
No. It's not a personal attack. It's not a personal attack. If you're taking it personal, maybe...
No. I'm just kidding.
That's all right, man.
Kidding. Good. Just joking.
So let me clarify what I'm saying here, because this is important. So if you're going to say, let's go with the times, you got to live with the times. Okay, so there was a time that people thought that homosexuality was disgusting, and therefore you should kill them. You should humiliate them. You should do all terrible things to them.
But that exists today in a lot of countries.
I'm just saying.
Well,
then there comes a time where the times come along, and all of a sudden homosexuality becomes normal. It's good. It's another alternative lifestyle, just another way. Then comes a time where we decide that the gender fluidity is just, there's no such thing as gender. We just get rid of gender. And then comes the next generation. Each generation comes up and looks back at the generation before and thinks, what idiots, they're so crazy. So what does living with the time mean? Living with the time means I have no truth. I just go with the flow. Whatever the flow is now, that's what it is. I don't have a truth.
Well, that's the argument with that is that when the Nazis believed that too, that it was truth. That all these people should be exterminated and everything. That was their philosophy of the day, Nazism.
Okay, and so the answer is?
It's not.
Get rid of anyone because one person
unchanging.
Because one person, right? Because one person or one group in history used truth as their way to destroy humanity. Therefore, we have to get rid of truth.
No, because that's not truth. That's the argument. That's not true.
So the idea is that the if you go by what's present in this time and what's right for now, basically you have no truth.
Right.
Because why is today's values valuable? Simply because we don't have 100 years of history to look back at it. That's all. In 100 years, we're going to look back at this time. We're going to go, wow, what idiots. Wow, how dumb they were. They were so stupid. I can't believe that. We're so much smarter. So we've done this for thousands of years. So,
right.
So why is today's truth any better than the truth of 2,000 years ago? They were just doing what was based on their times. We're doing what's based on our times. But this isn't true at all. It's just true for today. There will come a time where we're going to look back at this time and be embarrassed by this time. So again, the point is that the Torah is our truth. It's our story. What is our story? Our story is, and let's find out what our story is. What has our story been from the very beginning? Our story was that God came down on Mount Sinai. He gave us 2 Torahs, not 1 Torah. He gave us 2 Torahs. He gave us a written Torah. He gave us an oral Torah. That was our story from the very beginning. What was the story? God put the mountain over us and he married us. It's kisses and embraces. This is our story. Then other people came along and said, no, we have a different story. Our story is a different story. And so are we embarrassed of our story?
On the contrary.
Right? This is my story. So I like my story. Okay, it doesn't fit exactly the narrative of today. It walks in between. The Torah always walks in between. Like with opening the country or not open the country. Should you open the shuls or should you not open the shuls? So you have the Republicans, you got the Democrats, you have the liberals, and you have the conservatives. You have the Torah that walks in the middle, in between. And it's the same thing with every subject you're going to come up with. There's always, there's those who say homosexuality is disgusting and horrible and terrible, and we have to humiliate people, and the other people on the other side say, it's beautiful, it's wonderful. And you have the Torah, it walks in the middle. We have to respect people, but we keep it's about Hashem's desire. It's not about people. Hashem he's saying what is an abomination to him, not what's an abomination, period. That's because God says the same thing about other foods. They're not, food is not disgusting.
Well, God says the same thing about not keeping Shabbat.
Right, to'eva. In other words, something that's a to'eva.
Right.
It's a to'eva. Doesn't mean that you're a to'eva. It means it's a to'eva to him. He doesn't like it. So if you're in a relationship with God, then you respect his way. If you don't have a relationship with God, then then go on, do whatever you want. It's not God is not saying. Let me give you objective. Objectively, homosexuality is disgusting. That's not what God says. I'm not saying objectively. God is not talking objective. He's not objective. He's just telling you what he likes, what he doesn't like. Do you like it? Maybe you do, maybe you don't. That's not what this is about a relationship. When I married my wife, I didn't say, well, tell me all the things you like and don't like and so on. And we got married. I figured out most of the things she likes, and that's it. I'm like, okay, good. If she doesn't like it, I don't do it. We don't have an argument about it. She said, I don't like it. Okay, you don't like it. I'm not going to do it. But if I'm not married to my wife, so if you don't like something, I don't have to listen. I'm not married to you. I'm married to my wife. I have to listen to what she says. So this is our God. This is what he likes, this is what he doesn't like, and so on. That's it. No judgment. Why are we judging other people? Who's here to judge anybody else? This judgment call, this whole idea of judgment is coming from the wrong place. It means you're not having a relationship with God. It's not about a relationship at all. So when it comes from a relationship point, and again, so the Torah is always walking this fine line between everything because it's coming from a very, very different place. So this is but again, this is critical to Judaism. It's one of the 13 principles of faith that Maimonides codifies. Because if you decouple it, the whole Torah falls apart. The whole Judaism falls apart. No part of Judaism has any meaning or significance because everything, as you see, can be twisted and turned even into different religions. That's why I'm using it as an example. I'm not saying that you're, God forbid, in any way doing the same thing or anything similar to that. I'm just showing that if you just take the Torah and strip it of its oral moorings, what's to say that Christians don't get it right? What's to say? You have no reason to say that they're wrong. They're equally entitled to interpret it as we are. And maybe they're smarter. Maybe they listen. There's many more of them, and maybe their numbers they got together, and simply by the sheer numbers by that token, they've had more years and more time or whatever it is, more people, and they've just amassed.
Well, they've got a few mistranslations in there, but okay, whatever.
That's your interpretation, by the way.
Oh, okay.
I'm serious. That's their argument. The argument is, what do you mean? You have a Judaized Bible.
Right, Judaized, right.
You Judaized it. All these things are originally there. I mean, again, once you go there, it's like the whole thing just falls apart.
Right.
And that's the idea of being faithful. We're not a people of faith. We're a faithful people. We were there at Mount Sinai. God told Moses, and we just stay faithful. We just said, yes, we will do. Yes, we'll do it. And so the fact that someone came along, 300 years ago and said, came up with Bible criticism and came up with other things, we didn't pay attention. Everybody from when the Torah was given, they've been giving us a hard time about it. So what's new? Nothing new. So that's really so that's why it's so, to me, that's why I'm so glad you brought up the question. I'm so glad that some people stayed on to listen, because this is the crux of it. It's so critical and so important, and it gets in the way of people doing mitzvahs, because as soon as they start hearing all of these details, they go, I got Judaism right. I'm doing Judaism exactly the way it's supposed to be because it's comfortable and it's beautiful and it's wonderful and it fits my lifestyle. It doesn't make me uncomfortable. And yours is making me uncomfortable, and therefore it must be that the rabbis made it up. It must be that somebody else made it up. Because the God I believe in, he doesn't do details. Now, if you've ever been married, you know how unreasonable your spouse can be.
Yes.
So to think that God, being a spouse, is going to be any less unreasonable than your physical spouse, then you got something coming. God is much more unreasonable than your physical spouse. So for you to think that your relationship with God is just going to be like a walk in the park, and that everything that God is going to want is going to just fit with you, it's like you have no idea what a marriage is. You've never been married. The whole point of marriage is that you have two people who have very different opinions, and they thought that they could get along, and they struggle to try to work it out. And many times it doesn't work because they're just so different, and they have so different demands. So all of a sudden God's going to come along and he's going to be like, and they say in Yiddish, al-lemeleh. He's just al-lemeleh. He doesn't have any opinion. He doesn't really care. No. If I know what I like, and I am very, very particular about it. Okay, so when people come into my kitchen and they start making food for me and they don't make it exactly the way I like it, I'm not happy. I'm not a happy camper. I like it done exactly this way. And I like my clothing to be where it's supposed to be. I like my shoes to be where they're supposed to be. Yeah, but this is the way I like things to be done. So what? God doesn't care about anything. Okay, so you're turning God into some kind of a non-existent being. So he doesn't exist. He doesn't really have any wants, desires, wishes, or anything like that. Okay, so then you have a relationship with him.
Okay, so given your view, which I totally get, how can Chabad be so, which I really, really admire, how can Chabad be so open to every level of observance in the Jewish world, including Jews who don't even hardly know they're Jewish.
Why is that so hard?
People. Yeah.
I mean, not
People.
you don't
See,
even
what
understand the
you say is,
question.
if we're such fundamentalists, I
didn't use that word.
I'm saying, if we're such fundamentalists, how do we embrace everyone? Fundamentalists are not embracing.
Right.
And this
But
is
I
a
didn't
very
use that word. I was
view.
just thinking, how does it work that you think that everything came from Sinai, and yet you see, 99.9% of the Jews not doing what came from Sinai? Like, how can you be embracing?
Because I am just mirroring God. God embraces you. He embraces you. I'm not embracing you. God embraces you, so therefore I embrace you. I didn't make it. This is not my religion. I didn't make it up. I don't plan on. I'm not invested in Judaism for my sake, which is why I have no problem with the synagogue being closed if God says it should be closed, because there's a micro problem of maybe someone might get sick and die. God says, don't do the minyan. I'm good. I don't have any problem. I don't do this religion. I don't come to synagogue because I like going to synagogue. I go to synagogue because God likes going to synagogue. As soon as I find out he doesn't like me going to synagogue, I'm out of here. I don't have, there's no conflict. So if God tells me I should disregard every Jew who doesn't follow the mitzvahs, I would do that too. But he doesn't. He says the opposite. He says embrace everyone. That's what I do. God embraces everyone. So why should I be different than God? I'm just doing. I've been trying, by the way. That's one of the things that I've been trying to do. I'm trying to become non-religious. In other words, I was very religious as a kid, meaning I took the religion very, very serious. I didn't take God so serious.
Right.
And so I'm trying very, very hard. I've been working hard at this for a long time. To
not
not
be
be so religious, meaning I'm more practicing now than I was as a kid. So I'm more practicing. I'm doing more what God wants of me, but I'm doing it less because it's about me and more because it's about him. So I call that being less religious and more godly. So that's what I've been trying to do. But yes, it's actually very natural for people to be religious and become invested in the religion and therefore want to see the religion, and the practices of the religion thrive because they're it's like I want my team to win. I want Judaism to win. Go Judaism. Go God. It's like this is my team. It's like it's embarrassing my team has got so. But if you're not invested in that, if you're truly invested in God, well then, what does God want? He loves every Jew. So do I. That's it. So if he accepts every Jew and every Jew is his child, so why shouldn't I?
Yeah.
So thank you very, very, very much for bringing the subject up. It's very, very important. I can't stress it, how important it is. And hopefully more and more people can be open to exploring this because it's something
I don't really know how. I mean, I've never brought it up with you, but I don't really know how people gloss this question over.
They don't gloss it over. They simply they have a very clear understanding of that this is all made up by the rabbis.
Well, like I came on in the middle, and you have to learn. And be open-minded, and my husband's expression and my expression is just like yours, Robbie. Go with the flow. It's been that way. Just go with the flow. This is what's happening right now. I'm going with the flow, and it's very interesting what you're talking about, and because I'm going with the flow, and I came in the middle, and I learned something, but yet I don't know 99% of what you were talking about, because I've never read any of these things. I wouldn't know which book is which. And eventually, you know, I'm going to do it little by little and learn, and not judging myself harshly. And I'm going to go with the flow, whatever I feel is, does that make sense?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Just to bring you back to unorthodox. So have you seen Shtisel?
Yes.
Yeah.
So Shtisel, while it has some value to it, it's a Hollywood production. Well, it's made in Israel, so it's not Hollywood per se.
Yeah.
But it is a Hollywood type production. And the Hollywood type production is to impose itself onto every single possible platform it can get itself on. And so here it's taking its platform and imposing it upon a setting of religious Jews that make for an interesting conversation.
Right.
But basically what they're doing is they're just imposing a preconceived idea, and they're just superimposing it on a group. So they could do this with an Indian group, they could do this with a Muslim group, they could do this with a Christian group, they could do it with any group. So what they did here was, and what's the brilliance of Shtisel is that it's actually very accurate in all of the mannerisms of they had real people, real Hasidim on staff to make sure that everything they did is exactly according to it. It was very, very legitimate in the way it looks. But in terms of what's really underlying and what's really going on, they make sure to put their story over it. And so the same thing, I mean, unorthodox is much, much worse because there it's really a negative story against, and therefore they just thrive on these kinds of stories where just to make, because there's a I've done this for years in my other classes that I used to give in Heritage Point, because they're have a lot, here I'm talking I don't want to say I'm talking to the choir in a sense, but they're really I'm talking to a lot of people who the only reason they're coming to my classes is because they've simply retired into Heritage Point. And they are coming from a very, very, very different point of view, atheists and so on. So it made for really, really fun conversations. And I would do many times, they would either bring up articles that they had read, or I would bring up articles which were directly damaging to Orthodox Jews and just the whole industry, just an absolute attack on Orthodox and Hasidic Jews in particular, but Orthodoxy was just no pity, whereas there's plenty of pity for every other kind of, this is from the Forward or from other outlets that are just bashing the Orthodox without just again giving their spin on this thing. And I would try to give the other spin, kind of fill in fill in the story. And so it's interesting, the story of unorthodox. So the girl's name is, what's her name?
Esty?
Yeah.
No, the movie, but the actual one who wrote the book.
Deborah Feldman.
Oh, Feldman, yeah.
So Devorah Feldman has, I think her name is Sarah Devorah or something like that, or Devorah Sarah or something like that. Her cousin, she has a cousin with the exact same name, and her cousin actually also left the group, and now has become more connected to Chabad, and she's been doing the circuit of talking about unorthodox because it's her first cousin. And talking about the family and so on. It's fascinating if you can find the things on YouTube.
So anyway, I was invited to participate in a speech by this cousin.
Oh yeah? Who invited you?
The Chabad of San Clemente invited me.
Oh right. Yeah. They're doing it together with Lasovsky, together with Yorbelinda. Yeah, exactly. Sarah Borovic, I think her name is there. Borovitz or something. So she has a fascinating story to tell, and she just fills in some of the story around. And once you get the rest of the story, you go, oh, how come they didn't tell us that part?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I don't think, for example, it makes clear that in real life the husband left too.
Whatever. The point is, in the movie we had no interest in telling her story. The movie had an interest in using her story to do what they wanted to do with it, which is to create,
which is abuse of women. Abuse of women. That was the whole thing.
No, that religion is
right, abusive,
religion
right.
is abusive to women, and that religion has to be
exactly.
destroyed. If we want to save women from the abuse, we have to get rid of religion, which is the underlying theme of
correct
of many of these things. It's an undermining. Why? Because as long as the Torah is around, it is a threat, which is why it says that when the Torah was given on Sinai, because Sinai means hatred, because when the Torah was given, hatred came into the world. What was the hatred? The hatred is that God has a certain way he wants things to be done, and the rest of the world, or many people in the world, don't want to do it that way. So how can we do this without a conscience? I mean, Hitler said it himself, that the Jews are the Hitler Yamach Shemoy. He said the Jews are the conscience of the world.
Mm-hmm.
They're the ones who are going to make us feel bad if we go and kill people. So we have to get rid of the conscience of the world.
Right, get rid of the conscience.
Yeah, we're the conscience of the world. He was saying something so profound.
It really is.
So profound. And that's what so he was saying it very, very clearly, whereas others were just acting upon it. The Jews represented that there's a God in the world, that there's a relationship, that there's a right and a wrong, we have to do things the way God wants. And people were saying, we don't want to do what God wants. We want to do it our way. We want to live a free life and do whatever we want. We don't want anybody telling us what to do. That's the struggle. So again, I'm giving you the extreme, but we all have this struggle inside of us. There's a part of us that's struggling within us, and that part is saying, I want to do whatever I want. This Torah is getting in my way. So there's a really easy way to get rid of this Torah. Just decouple it from its oral moorings, and boom, you can do whatever you want, because it's now open to interpretation, and I could find whatever I want in the Torah.
I can write my regulations.
What was that?
I can write some regulations.
Exactly. I could tailor make it to me and feel so good that I'm having a relationship with God. This is fantastic.
Right.
So it's beautiful. I could have my cake and eat it too. So that's the struggle that we have inside of us. And by the way, it's not just you. Everybody has a struggle. I had this struggle. We all had this struggle. It's not a struggle between the written Torah and the oral Torah. It's a struggle between our godly soul and our animating soul. That's the real struggle. And it's the real struggle between the part of us that goes, deep down, I kind of know I should do this, but not so deep down, I don't want to do it.
Yeah.
So I just, let me come up with some kind of excuse. Let me come up with some kind of reasoning and way to make myself
rationalize. Yeah.
Rationalize it. Exactly. So that's it. So the first step in, again, the Chabad approach is, okay, so let's at least make sure that we're thinking straight. In your heart, you can't reason with your heart, but you can reason with the mind. You can't have a conversation like this and the mind will go, that's a point I never thought of before. Yes, you've brought some new information that I didn't have before, which is what I want. I want people to have as much information as possible from a big picture perspective to be able to put this in context for them, and then go, and now let's get your head on straight. So even if your head is on straight, doesn't mean you're not going to, you're going to do everything right, because you're still going to struggle with the two parts, the godly and the animating. You still have that same struggle. So it's really the beginning of that is really this Chabad, and that's what we're doing tonight. It's 3 days before Shavuos. Supposed to stay up late on Shavuos, but we did it tonight. We stayed up till 10 o'clock.
Oh my gosh!
We're from 7 to 10. It's a 3-hour marathon.
It's been wonderful. I'm going to hang up because I'm going to sleep.
Yes.
But otherwise, I would say, and I can do this for hours. I would question everything. But I'm learning. That's great. I appreciate it. Okay.
I love questions. I love people who disagree. And but what I like to do is, again, I myself love to listen to people who have real criticisms of the Torah and criticisms of the oral Torah, and I go and research it. And see,
it's like I don't have criticism because I don't know enough about it to criticize, but I have a hard time with God. That's where I'm coming from. So. And that's my struggle, because I think of the power within me versus the power of God. And because I was never, I don't know, maybe because it was never talked about. God was never talked about in my house. So I always questioned, and there was never really an answer. So that's where that's a lot of my issue, whether, to go forward with things and do things like that. So but that's a personal thing. That's, it's not.
Yeah, we all struggle. Again, these are all similar struggles that we all
Yeah.
have.
Yeah, it is. I want to thank you very much and thank
You're very
everybody.
welcome. Have a
And
good
I'll
night.
see you later.
Yes.
Rabbi,
Bye.
Bye,
I have been studying Judaism since I was 3 or 4 years old. Okay, not so much from home, but from synagogue and Hebrew school and camp and synagogue and then college and all the classes with the rabbis. And then I went to the Hebrew University and I studied mysticism there, and I did Kohelet for a whole year, and every rabbi, you name it. And you know what? I really don't remember, except for Rabbi Hartman, who started the Hartman Institute in Israel and Jerusalem. He was my teacher. I don't remember anybody ever talking about God.
That's strange.
No, really. I mean, I don't remember ever having I don't remember having it was sort of like an assumed thing. Like God was there, but we never discussed the nature of God. The whole idea of this Tanya. I remember the first time I went to take a class at the Chabad for the first time I entered a foot into a Chabad. And I asked Rabbi Kaczynski, what are all these books, Tanya? What is that? And he goes, aha. I had never, it's a whole treatise. It's like volumes about the nature of God and man's relationship to God. Like, this is so out of my wheelhouse completely after all of these years. So, you understand us, right?
Yes. No, for sure. I understand 100% because first of all, I've only come to understand these things later in my own life. So I've gone through my own kind of...
you mean in the reverse, kind of? Understanding what other people are like. Is that what you're saying?
No. Even understanding God, understanding the relationship with God, and understanding...
Oh, I see.
So I've gone through my own... because I've questioned a lot and I've heard a lot of questions against it, and I've actually done the research. So instead of, in other words, many people, when they hear criticism, they just shut it down. They don't want to listen. I take it very personal and very serious. So when someone criticizes, I go, well, that's a really good criticism. I don't know. I don't know the answer. I need to do some research. I need to find out if what's the answer to this. And when I do, I was like, so sometimes I get to a place and I go, wow, I don't know how the rabbis are going to get out of this one. Now, how's the Torah going to get out of this one? This one seems ironclad. Whoever came up with this question against the Torah, boy, that's a really good one. I've never heard that before, and I don't see any way out. I don't see a way out, and it troubles me for like months and months. Like struggling to try to understand. Like, that's a really good criticism, and then boom, I get the answer from somewhere, or either it comes to me or I hear it from someone else, and I go, wow, I should trust the Torah more, because every time I question it, you always find out there's a good answer for it. And so I've gone through this many times, and therefore I really understand where people are coming from, and I just want to try to share with them and what I know so far. I don't know everything, that's for sure. There's much I do not know, but over the years I have collected a little bit over the years that I like, that I'm happy to share. So thank you for asking.
Thank you, Rabbi.
And,
Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Rabbi.
You're still on, Carol?
I know. I can't believe I'm still on. I'm shocking myself. I'm in Dallas, everyone.
Oh,
So
she's
what-
in Dallas?
You're in
Yeah.
Dallas?
Is it 12 o'clock?
Yeah.
What time is it?
It's it's 12 o'clock.
Yeah, wow.
But it was such a great conversation. Thank you so much.
You got to thank Jerry for bringing up the question.
Yeah, bring it
Yeah,
up.
thanks, Jerry.
Thanks, Jerry.
Thanks,
All right,
Rabbi.
good night, everybody.
Night.
I've got 4% left. And I got
Daphne,
it.
you still on?
Who?
Is Daphne still on?
I saw her name.
Yeah, I wonder if she's still on. Some people just leave it on.
Yeah,
Okay.
no, okay.
All right.
All right, so
Good night.
good night.
Okay.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll see you.